Good morning, good morning, good morning. As I say, if we're in the UK, good afternoon, good evening, if you are anywhere else in the world. You are now on the couch with Creatives, the podcast for creative professionals everywhere. As you well know by now, we're part of the Creatives Group, the professional networking group for creative professionals everywhere. I'm very excited today because we've got a really special guest on the couch with us, Julie. Who is it?
Hi, well, joining us on the couch today is the award-winning producer, director, actor, voice artist, writer, Guy Masterson. What did they say? Jack of all trades and master of none, but you seem to be master of everything.
I wish.
Well, welcome to On the Couch, Guy. Lovely to speak to you. Well, you're a man of many talents. You've done so much and you've won so many awards doing it as an actor, director and producer, including an Olivier award. So, quite impressive. But let's start right at the beginning. You graduated from Cardiff University with a BSc joint honours in biochemistry and chemistry in 1982. And then, boom, you made this huge leap from that to acting. You jumped over the Atlantic, you landed in Los Angeles, you studied drama at UCLA. What on earth happened?
Well, I was always of a musical and entertainment-based family. My father was a violinist and a conductor, and my mother was a jazz singer. And my mother had toured Canada, and I remember her telling me stories, toured Canada and North America singing South Pacific and Choo Chin Chow on Ice, and went down to Hollywood and worked on a Hollywood movie. I think it was I Want to Live, with a Hollywood producer called Walter Wanger, who went on to produce Camelot. And this was in 1957. And she met my father, who was conducting the Paramount Symphony Orchestra for the movies. And they got married within 3.5 months. So I guess I was born into an entertainment family. Now, my mother's sister was an opera singer, and her mother was a Welsh woman who won a National Eisteddfod, and her brother, and I know this was going to come up in the interview at some point, her younger brother was Richard Burton. So there was a lot of entertainment in our family. And so we grew up with singing, and we all played instruments. It wasn't quite the Von Trapps, but we were all aware of what it was to perform. Now, unfortunately, when I was 10, my father died, and we were put into a little bit of a difficult situation. And I won a scholarship to a school called Christ Hospital, which holds not entertainment, but theatre is very high on the agenda, and there's lots of music in the school. And I got involved as much as I could with all of that. And always in the back of my mind was the fact that I had a famous uncle. Although I didn't really know what fame was. I mean, I guess during that period of time, this was 1971 to 1979, before I went to university, he was one of the most famous people in the world, but to me, he was just my uncle. And of course, he was married to Elizabeth Taylor, who was also rather famous. So, and of course, I met him time during my life, which was always fascinating. But it was very strange to know that these superstars were sort of in the background, and then just turning up on the doorstep every so often, and sitting with the family. There was no intention for me to go into the business at all, or into any entertainment aspect. I wasn't really good enough to be a professional musician. I was fairly good, I passed my grades and all of that, but not good enough to be a professional musician. And I didn't really have the inclination. And so I just followed my friends into the sciences and ended up at Cardiff University. But in 1981, a very strange thing occurred. Richard Burton came to stay with us. And in 1981, it was on the opening day of Wimbledon, I remember. And it was the day that McEnroe famously said, "You guys are the pits of the world. You cannot be serious." And my uncle Richard turned up, and we watched the end of this game. And I had tickets to go to Wimbledon the following Friday. And he bought a Mini Cooper. inexplicably a Mini Cooper, and I then had to drive it because he couldn't drive it, and then he needed to get this car to Switzerland, so he asked me to drive it to Switzerland with him. So I had this trip with Richard Burton in a Mini Cooper S, and that was what engendered my interest in drama, theatre, music, all of this kind of thing, poetry. And I went back to college after this extraordinary 5-week experience with Richard Burton, and I think something had happened in that period of time. It was like an horizon had opened up to me, and but I still didn't think about becoming a professional. I finished my degree. I really wasn't interested in biochemistry particularly, but Uncle Richard, he convinced me to finish it. And in 1982, after I graduated, I went off to LA. And to most people in the business, LA is Hollywood. So all my friends were actors. All my newfound friends in Hollywood, in America, were actors, and I was in the restaurant business. And then in 1984, Richard Burton died, and to me it was devastating. And my girlfriend at the time was an actress, and she said, maybe it's time for you to have a go. I didn't know what having a go was, really. So I enrolled at UCLA, did an audition for them, got into the class. And next thing I knew, within 6 months, I'd got my first role. It was a lead role in a musical. I'd never sung. And I was in that lead role for 6 months, got an agent. And then one thing led to another. And here I am, 40 odd years later, still in the business.
Did it help having a famous uncle?
Well, no, I didn't tell anybody in the business because I didn't know whether I was any good. And I didn't want to release that information until I knew that I had something. And my girlfriend was urging me to, and a few people who knew were trying to urge me to say so, but I didn't want it to be nepotistic. I wanted to kind of prove to myself, if anything, that I had something, that I had some talent, that I could survive in the business. And of course then it got out anyway, and then one thing led to another, and yeah. But I didn't follow the traditional pattern of, TV, movies, getting leads in movies and then becoming a star. That didn't happen for me. I kind of wanted it to, like all Hollywood actors do, and especially young ones. I was young, 25, 26 when I started. And of course you want to be a star. And I had some very near misses with Moonlighting and LA Law. I went through several auditions for both of those and came down to the last two and didn't get them. And then I elected to come back to Britain and get a classical training. So I enrolled at LAMDA, luckily enough, and came out after LAMDA and was promptly out of work, as you are, So I did a one-man show, a one-person play. And I fell in love with the genre of performing solo. And I decided not to go back into the mainstream. It suddenly took me over. And I did another one-person play, Under Milk Wood, by Dylan Thomas, which my famous Uncle Richard had introduced me to. And I did this as a solo performance, which had never been done before. And that took me all around the world. And suddenly I was earning a living, doing what I loved and controlling my own career. So I never went really back into the mainstream. But in touring this Under Milk Wood around the world, in general festivals and everywhere, really, I was meeting all these incredible artists who were brilliant solo performers or whatever. And they asked me for advice how to do their shows at the Edinburgh Festival. So I said I'd help them. And I inadvertently became a producer. So I call myself an accidental producer, in fact. But I've ended up producing 150 shows in 30 years. So
that's amazing. And one of my next questions was going to be about how you started your own production company, but you kind of answered that already. So that's great.
Yes.
Making my job very, very easy. Obviously, when you went over to LA and doing things over there, it's very movie based. Movies is one thing, but theatre is something else. And there's something really magical about a theatre, and I think if you step onto a stage and you can command that stage, there's no feeling like it, is there really? I think once you've done that, it would help sway you towards the theatre rather than the movies, because the theatre's just magic to me anyway.
Well, I would agree. I mean, I love the feeling of being on stage, and when you're performing solo, you know, you've got the whole stage to yourself, if you like. You have to learn a whole bunch more skills. You know, how do you control an entire performance, an audience on your own? How does the energy maintain? How do you keep it going? How do you learn all those lines? You know, I remember one of my first, in fact, my first professional theatre production where I won my equity card was a play called The Caretaker by Harold Pinter, which to this day is one of my favorite plays. And I had to understudy one of the characters. I played one of the characters and I had to understudy the other. And he had a 15-minute monologue. And I thought to myself, I'm looking at this monologue going, how on earth can I possibly learn 20 odd pages of text for a 15-minute monologue? It terrified me. And of course, you do the 15 minutes and you don't die at the end of it. You know, you're fine. And I now consider learning tomes of text as just learning another page, learning another page, learning another page. And before you know it, you've learned 60 pages and you have a solo show under your belt. Wow.
Because I mean, that's pressure really, a solo, because it's like to carry a whole performance, the range that you need. It's not just the learning the lines, the range that you need to be a one-man show. And as you say, keep the audience completely engaging with you from the minute you open your mouth to the minute you walk off.
Yeah, there are some skills that you need to learn, and one of the keys is not to be scared of an audience, to know that, to make them your friend, and with that comes that great thing that I think I would love to teach actors from an early age is that acting is not about showing off. It's about conveying a story to an audience, and the audience don't want you to show off. They want to receive a story. So if you can create that relationship and not be scared of it, you are conveying confidence to an audience. They will sit back and relax and listen to your every word. So acting is not about ambition and showing off and don't I look good? And I mean, for some people it is, obviously, but I think doing solo shows knocks all that out of you, and I think that's also informed my direction as well. When I direct others, I try to convey that strength, if you like, for the actors in my companies to make friends with the audience and not
because they want to come along for the ride, don't they? You know, when you have seen not just a good play, but going back to the movies, for me anyway, when I have seen a terrific film that I've not had to really think about, but has just pulled me in emotionally, and I've gone out and I'm either walking on air or I'm in pieces because I've cried every time the lead, you know, and I'm terribly emotional when I watch things, I have to say.
I'm a softie, absolute softie.
Yeah. But when you come out and you've gone on the journey with it, and you're quite exhausted at the end, but in such a magnificent way because you have gone on the journey, that's what the best actors do, don't they? They reel you in. And they're friends with their audience, and some celebrities are fantastic at interacting with their audience and their fans, and they're the ones that will last. You know, the people that are in it for the fame and the glory, that they don't tend to have the longevity, because you can see through that after a while.
You can. One of the things that I was always been a perennial question of mine is this thing about charisma and charm, and otherwise known as presence. And I believe that charisma and presence are effectively the same effect on an audience, but they're different. I think you're born with charisma, but you can create presence. So even the most mousy person who hides at parties can become a great actor if they follow a series of tenets in their work, so that they explode on stage and they're wonderful, but then they can disappear into the shadows when they go home. Or if they work on film, for example, they have that wonderful connection with the camera, which may not be there in real life. Of course, we all want it to be there because we see them on stage, we see them on camera, and we want them to be as they were when we watched them, but they may not be. But that doesn't matter as long as they have that connection when they're doing their work. Now, Uncle Richard had this unbelievable charisma. Wherever he went, people would turn their heads. He would stop conversations. People would stop what they're doing and follow him. I could not understand that. So being in his presence made me question that. And when I started out as an actor, you know, 24, I think I was when I went to UCLA, I was desperate to know whether I had this same power. And when I had to accept that I didn't, I had to accept that people didn't turn their heads when I walked into a room, or, you know, so I had to make it work on stage. And the only way I knew how to do that was by being so on top of my material that I could be confident. And it's that confidence that conveys presence. So if you watch actors on stage, it's all about their confidence. If they aren't confident, or if they don't know their lines well enough, or if they're unsure about something, that will come through. Just like in life, you see it in people who are not confident or diffident, if you like. But actors, you know, when they're confident, they hold an audience.
A lot of people, or a lot of producers and directors say that actors should really get on top of their lines, really know their lines when they go into auditions, so they don't have to worry about it and can purely concentrate on being the character that they are. Would you say that's your top tip for actors?
I would say it's my top tip for actors when they're doing the job. I think auditioning is very difficult because it's very, very hard to get on top of a script for such a short burst of time. Camera work is different. I mean, you're working in tiny little bursts, sometimes less than, you know, two or three lines. Very, very rarely do you shoot a scene which is over a minute long. So you can work on a scene and get really underneath the skin of it, do the scene and then move on to the next one. Whereas theatre, you are rehearsing for 4 weeks so that you can get down in there. What I don't understand with actors, and this is my biggest tip, when they come into rehearsals, they should come in with their lines already learned. So the rehearsals are not about learning lines or anchoring lines. It's about really getting down into the nitty-gritty of the character so that you are no longer thinking as an actor, you're thinking as the character. When you get then to performance, you are the character. You are those people that you're purporting to be on stage. Whereas if you're starting from a position trying to learn your lines during rehearsal, as far as I'm concerned, both as a director and as an actor, I will only be where I should have been on the first day of rehearsals by the first performance, and that's not good enough, not for me.
Do you find we had another person that we chatted to who's a theatre director like yourself, a chap called Chris Pickles, and we had a very interesting conversation about new talent coming up, didn't we, Julie? And he said something, in fact, he put out a little bit of a vent on social media because it was about audition tapes, audition reels. And I don't know whether I'm going to pick your brains now about whether the difference that you've seen in talent coming through from the past years and talent coming through now, especially in the days of social media where people almost think that they've got it off pat straight away and they maybe don't have to put in as much work or whatever. But his gripe was, you know, the brief was sent out for the audition reels before, send the reel before we'll invite you to a face-to-face. And it was for a specific character, and they set out a specific set of criteria because they wanted to see certain things, so that they gave a very explicit direction. We want you to film yourself, but we don't want you to film yourself in front of the camera. You've got to be a little way back. So he wanted to see the body movement of this particular piece. And they had to do a song as well. And again, he said, we chose the song, the musical director chose the song for a particular vocal range, that there was a reason why they chose these things. And he said, you know, most of the people that sent through their audition tapes didn't send what was asked for. They sent close-up shots whispering into camera when that wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to hear the vocal and the range. They sent songs in that were not the piece, completely different piece. And it was almost like, well, I know this song, so I'll send that because it will sound better. Do you see that a lot, or not so much in your
Well, not in my field. I generally work with a casting director who then I meet face to face the actors that I'm auditioning. I also, for theatre, I think it's very important. You need to feel their live presence. Also, some people are not great at these things. They don't follow instructions, as you say, and consequently they're put to the side immediately. So you're not giving yourself the best shot. Anyway, I'm not good on those self tapes. In fact, I don't think I've booked a self tape. So I'm also a commercial actor, and I booked a lot of commercials, however, not since self-taping. So I must be doing something wrong, and I follow the instructions rigidly. But I know people who get booked all the time. So it's a whole new set of skills. When I started my career in Hollywood, there were no casting directors, or there were casting directors in the studio. There was a handful. They were big names. And to get in front of those people was a big thing. Within 3 years of my starting career, by 1988, there were 800 casting directors in Hollywood, and you couldn't get in touch with the director directly. You had to go through a casting director. So they effectively became the gatekeepers. And one thing I learned as a young actor in Hollywood was that if I didn't get my resume and picture in front of all 800 casting directors, once a month, I would disappear as far as they're concerned. So then when I came, and that was what we had to do. We had to spend, I think if I remember rightly, it cost about $2 for every single letter. So that's $1,600 a month just sending letters out to casting directors, which you have to do every month. That's crazy. And this is for all, even the out of work actors. So how do you do that? Then when I came back to Britain, it was virtually the opposite. So I'd done 3 or 4 years as a professional in Hollywood, suddenly came back to Britain. In Britain, if you put your resume and picture in front of a casting director more than once a year, you're blacklisted for pressuring them. So it was like, what can I do to help my career? It was a very strange thing. Also, nepotism in Hollywood is everywhere. It's who you know. So everybody was urging me to mention my famous uncle and my aunt by marriage, you know. I mean, you couldn't get too big a connections. Not that these people or their names were going to help me. I mean, I wasn't likely to call Auntie Elizabeth up and say, can you get me an audition at 20th Century Fox, Auntie Liz? That was never going to happen. But when I came back to Britain, if I mentioned it, it would be boastful. And it would work against me. It had to be mentioned by somebody else. And they had to bring it up in conversation. Oh, I understand that you're the nephew of Mr. Richard Burton. So it's wonderful. And that's how it would happen. So it was a very, very different approach to the career. And over here, I felt very helpless because in America, you're very proactive, and at least you feel you're doing something towards moving your career forward. Over here, I was out of work, unknown at the age of 30. Nobody needed to know me. And I've been in the position where you'd rather not know who's out there in the room because you've got no work for them. So you'd rather not know they're there. Whereas in America, the casting directors make their living by knowing all the young actors. And if they can come up with a coterie of wonderful new talent, they're going to move up in the world. So it's a very different approach. I think that's now more.
Yeah. Do you think that's still the case in today's fast-paced world? Is it still
No, I think
in America? Is England catching up a little bit? Do you have to be more proactive now?
Changed. Things have certainly changed. Things have certainly changed. When I started in Britain in 1990, it was, what school have you been to? You know, have you been to Lambda or RADA, for example? And in those days, if you'd been to RADA, Lambda, Central, Guildhall, Bristol, Vic, you know, you'd be more likely to get an audition than you would if you went to some of the lesser ones like Webber Douglas or the Drama Studio or something like that. Nowadays, it's much more egalitarian. Still, Lambda and RADA carry the weight, and Central. The Royal Welsh College is a great college now, regarded as one of the finest conservatoires in the world. So, you know, it's far more egalitarian, I think. Still, it's harder for, I would as I would say, the working class actor, if there is such a thing as working class now, but I would say that it's harder for young people without wealth in their families to break through.
It's so soul destroying though, isn't it? Because you feel you're marketing yourself and promoting yourself and knocking on doors and pushing yourself, your foot through doors, and you know, instead of being an actor.
Yes, well, I mean, 'twas ever thus. I mean, look, I think in any profession, you've got to take your career by the scruff of its neck and do whatever you can to promote yourself. However, in this country, if you put your foot in the door, as they say, they will close it to you forever. You might get in the door that time, but then you won't get in again. So you can't, it's a very British thing to overpressure, and they don't want you to.
It's a fine balance then.
Very fine balance, very fine balance.
Well, you've spent like 30 odd years for over 27 consecutive seasons. Your company, Theatre Tours International, has become the most highly awarded and nominated independent theatre producer at the Edinburgh Festival. I mean, you're quite the Mr. Edinburgh Festival, aren't you? Tell us a bit about the string of hits that you've had there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's true. I started with Undermilk Wood, and back in 1984, I had performed it for nearly a year before someone persuaded me to take it to the Edinburgh Fringe. I thought I was going to lose my shirt, and I didn't. In fact, I sold every single ticket that was available, and I thought, oh, this isn't what I expected. This is a lot of fun, and it opened up the world to me. And then I followed that up with Animal Farm, another great British literary title, and I did it in the same physical style as I did Undermilk Wood. So I had these two classic British texts, which I'd done in a style which had never been attempted before, physical performance storytelling. And so suddenly I was earning a living, and it was all under my control. And in doing that, then I came across all these wonderful other performers, and I started helping them perform. And as I said earlier, I became an accidental producer. So I was just doing for them what I was doing for myself and putting the shows on at Edinburgh. And then I became very interested in helping young people with, well, not necessarily young, helping people with great ideas. So they would come to me and say, I've got this idea for a play, but I've got no idea how to do it. And I would say, well, let's talk about it. And I would talk them through, and they'd say, can you help me? And I'd say, love to, it's a great idea. So I would help them develop it dramaturgically. I would give them advice of how to produce it. And very often, if I was really interested in it, I would offer to direct, or I would offer to co-produce with them. And suddenly I had my fingers in some really interesting work. But I think one of the things which really advanced my reputation, if you like, or my company's reputation, was that sometimes I would see something in Australia or New Zealand or America, which was really, really good. And they had money. This company would have money, and they'd say, we'd love to come to the Edinburgh Festival. Will you present me? Now, presenting is different to producing. Presenting is when you don't have money in the game, in the project. You're simply general managing a show for them using their money. So I would present these wonderful shows at the Edinburgh Festival, but my name would be alongside theirs in the title. And so when they won an award, effectively my company won the award as well, and I got the kudos for it. So I was, there was a lot of piggybacking going along in terms of reputation. So my company won loads of awards through international performance that I presented. And at the same time, I was picking new work for myself and helping British performers and directing them, and maintaining my solo work. So I was, suddenly I had my fingers in all these pies, and not deliberately. I never set out to be a writer. I just ended up helping other people write their work, and then thought, well, if I can make their work successful, why don't I write something for myself? Adaptations, dramaturging. Suddenly you find yourself doing all the work, all these little jobs. And I think if I was to prioritize one of them now, what would I want for the rest of my life? If I could survive, it would be writing. If I could have a place on a west-facing beach where I could watch the sunset with my laptop as the sea is rolling in and just write, that's what I would want to do.
Wouldn't we all?
Yeah, that sounds lovely. That sounds lovely.
That's my dream, and Brigitte knows that too, my wife Brigitte. And I think we both have that. I think she wants a lake, a west side facing lake. We were in Canada last week with one of my shows, The Shark is Broken, which opened in Toronto. And we took 4 days out to go up to Lake Huron. And we were west facing and we watched the sunset down there. Beautiful fresh water, lovely crisp air, Canadian sunsets, just beautiful. So there are many places in the world we could go. However, would I miss performing? I probably would if I didn't perform for 6 months. You get antsy and say, I've got to get back on stage. So I have this one-man Christmas carol. So every year around November, I start touring that. I've got 42 performances lined up between mid-November and December 31st this year. So that's good. And then off to Australia to direct a musical. And then you have the Edinburgh development period, which is the period from sort of March through to August, when you're deciding what you're going to present and produce. And so it's very varied. It's very varied.
It's good though, and it's funny because most of the people that we've interviewed, Julie, haven't we, who've had stellar careers like yourself, nearly all of them say, I kind of got into it by accident. I sort of did this and I met this person and then I did this and then I did that. And it's so lovely because it's so genuine, but it's something I can really relate to, because a lot of the things that I've done that have been quite good myself, been okay, I'm not on your level, but the things that I've really loved doing, I've done completely. It hasn't been premeditated. It's like, oh, I'll go and do this. Or we did a film over lockdown, didn't we, Julie? And I produced my first film over lockdown called Scooch. It was a comedy, and it was born by the desire to get out of the house. I'm a video producer, but I said, well, let's make a film. I've never made a film before. How hard could it be? A bit like Ignorance on Fire, when I get going, it's like, yeah, we'll do this and we'll worry about how it happens.
Well, that's
later.
the thing. You have to keep up your levels of enthusiasm, don't you? For different projects. We got this band of merry men together, and I did promise them, as they were all volunteers, that I would put it into a film festival or two and see what happened. And we've got like 20 odd awards now. People have loved it. People have just loved it. It's a very short, stupid, very British comedy, and it seems to be doing its stuff. But from the back of that as well, the little crew that we put together, people that I've never met before, other opportunities have come, and it's amazing. And I think people sometimes get a little bit too hung up on ambition, maybe, or where it is they want to go. And if you just calm down and enjoy the journey.
Open up your heart a bit. You can find ways. It comes to you almost.
It comes to you, yes, if you're open to it. And one of the things when I first became an actor, and I said, I just want to earn enough money to feed myself. Fame and fortune aren't important to me. And he said, well, then you don't want it enough. Okay, what? I just want to earn enough to put food on the table, and you don't want it enough. But I don't understand you. I just want enough money. You don't want it enough. I said, what, money? He said, you don't want it enough. I said, I couldn't understand what he was saying. Finally, it came to me. If you do what you love, the money will come. If you do it for the money, it won't come, because you're chasing the money.
Yeah.
And finally, I realized if you do it, what you love, you'll do it well. You eventually won't do anything else. That's what you'll be doing because you love it.
Yeah, you do. You kind of light up a room almost when you're in that zone, and like you will have felt it on the stage when you're helping other people. I love helping other people. I especially love, my thing is helping youngsters get going. And on Scooch, we had a very young cameraman who got his first proper job on the back of Scooch when our first award came through, and it was just delightful. And I love seeing young people realize their potential. If that's what your heart is pulling you to, don't let anyone tell you you can't do it because you should be doing this or should be doing that.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that the problem with education at the moment, in my view, is that they are pushing people into, they're trying to funnel people into jobs that fulfill what society requires, not necessarily what they want to do. And most people do want to be creative, or they want to have some kind of creative output in their lives. A lot of people do want to earn money, and there's nothing wrong at all with that. I'm saying if you get people to be creative, they will produce and they will contribute to society. And they'll contribute far more readily because they're doing what they love than they will if they're just doing a 9-to-5 job and going home and doing their hobby.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. We saw that in lockdown, didn't we? The outpouring of creativity that happened in lockdown from people, not just from me and you, Julie, but
I've always wanted to write, sort of thing.
Yeah. So, you know, the creative, that's something that I have a big soapbox that I get on regularly, is about promoting the creative industries, which is what Creatives is all about, is connecting, growing, developing globally people in the creative industries, no matter what industry they're in, because they don't get a bad rap at school level. You know, they don't, you know, the first things that get cut in the budgets are music lessons, physical education, art class, big drama class.
But going back to lockdown, the number of people who turned their hobbies into businesses, lucrative businesses, was just phenomenal.
Yeah, especially if they've had experience in business, suddenly they turn it to doing what they want, and they realize there is this income there to be had. I think most people limit themselves by their fears. When Brigitte had urged me to write a screenplay about the trip with Uncle Richard that I told you about, it is actually a wonderful story, but for years I told it as in an anecdotal way, and had people laughing about the moments when I referred to Uncle Richard in a pub and people came over and begged for his autograph. All these are great stories, but how do you put them down into a structure that you can convey? And for years I'd struggled with this, and then I struggled with my fear of not knowing how to write a screenplay. And so during lockdown I did a lot of research on screenplays and found that storytelling in the film form is exactly the same as storytelling in the theatre form. There is a discipline and a structure to it, but all that's learnable, and it's nothing to fear. And so I just started writing, and out came my first screenplay, which has now been optioned. So yeah, don't be, I would say, one of the biggest things I would say to young people is don't be scared by your dreams.
Yes, I'd say that a lot.
What are you going to call it? Driving with Uncle Dickie?
Gone for a Burton was my initial.
Gone for a Burton. Oh, that's fantastic. But you know, it's not just your uncle. You've been, you know, obviously such a famous name. You've worked with so many stars like Christian Slater and what was that one you did? Bill Bailey and Alan Davies. You did The Odd Couple. You've worked with such wonderful names in your career, and then you know, it's quite mind-boggling for ordinary people.
Well, you know, there are directors out there who work with some absolute megastars, and I started working with comedians, and because I find that comedians are incredibly talented actors in general. They you know, obviously to hold an audience, a much less discerning audience, much more critical, if you like, in the palm of their hands, telling jokes. I mean, if your material isn't good, you're going to flop. And if you can't hold an audience, you're going to flop. So comedians have a bunch of skills that are really useful for actors. All I had to tell them were the basics of acting. You know, learn your lines, go over there, move that.
Yeah, but they still have to be quick thinking.
Very quick. And they were terrific. And Bill Bailey in particular I call him a genius. Genius. Christian Slater was terrific. He very present, very edgy, perfect for that role of McMurphy, the Jack Nicholson role. Terrific. Mackenzie Crook.
Oh, I love him.
That was his first theatre piece. He'd been on stage as a comedian, but he hadn't done a major stage role. So I'm very proud to have given Mackenzie Crook his his
Big break.
big stage role. Yeah.
Oh, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. I think he's ever so clever.
And
Yeah.
he's lovely. He's such a lovely, honest.
So you mentioned earlier your the shark is broken. Let's talk about this, because this is your current big project, isn't it?
Yes, and that's a lovely one, because Ian Shaw, Robert Shaw's son, and I have been friends for 20 odd years. And he was the boyfriend of one of my best friends who I've directed in 4 or 5 shows. And he came up to Edinburgh with her to watch her perform this piece. And we became friends then. And he knew about my relationship with my uncle. And my uncle was also an alcoholic, famous alcoholic. And his father, of course, Robert Shaw, was an alcoholic.
Oh.
And he then explained to me that he was struggling with his father's reputation. Also, as a young actor, he was the only one in his family, and he had 9 siblings who looked like his father. So, and he was the only one who was an actor. So when he walked into an audition room, people were expecting his father. When I walked into an audition room, people weren't expecting Richard Burton. Because not only was my uncle, I didn't look like him, whereas he looked like his dad, and he wanted nothing to do with it. So for years and years and years, he wanted to avoid anything to do with his father. He wanted to make his reputation on his own, and he was a damn good actor. So that relationship with Robert Shaw actually got in his way, because people were looking for Robert Shaw. Had he used his father's name and gone out there and initially in his career and said, yes, I'm Robert Shaw's son and I'm a chip off the old block, hire me, he might have got some big roles early on and then could have started following his own path. He chose not to, and he struggled because of it, and not for the right reasons. And finally, he called me in 2017 and said, I'm bored of being poor, and I've got an idea. It's 3 men in a boat. And I said, would that boat happen to be the Orca? And he goes, yes. And said, okay. And said, what do you want me for? Some advice? He said, well, I thought you might read it and tell me what you think of what I've written. I said, okay, I'll have a read. And who's going to play Dad? And he said, I thought I might. I said, okay, fine. Who's going to direct? He said, I thought you might. I said, yes. So not only am I dealing with this incredibly well-written piece of work, the backstory of the making of Jaws, based on his father's diary and the historical, there's so much written about it, that effectively you get this, it's a smorgasbord for Jaws fans, and it's a brilliantly written play about alcoholism. And he plays his father, which I think is incredibly courageous. So yes, we knew we were onto a good thing which ticked a lot of producing boxes, but also Ian was terrified that if it didn't work, he would be absolutely slated. So there were a lot of eggs in one basket for him, and they were fragile eggs.
Well, it was nominated for the Olivier Award for Best New Comedy. So do you have a lot of laughs during this during the production?
Yes, during this hard-hitting play about alcoholism. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds a bit weird, but yeah.
I mean, what better way to get people to listen to a story about that than make them laugh? And yeah, we do. And what made me extremely proud about that piece was that it started with a conversation between friends, and I'm not saying I had a huge hand in it happening, because I think it would have happened anyway. But I enabled it, and I protected Ian as best I could from a directorial point of view. I knew his sensitivities about his dad. I'd experienced the same sensitivities about my uncle. I produced a play about my uncle, which dealt with that whole thing that people said about Richard Burton wasting his talent after he died. And I wanted to put that record straight. It was a cathartic exercise for me, and I knew it would be the same for him. So when we put it together, all of those things came together, and yes, it got picked up by Sonia Friedman, who is probably the world's best producer, and she promised that she would look after it. and she would give us the best creatives that we could have to realize it on a bigger scale. And Ian and I went on this dream together, really.
Fantastic.
It opened at the Ambassadors Theatre in London in October last year. It's also opened in Toronto.
Yes, we reopened in Toronto for 7 weeks, 2 weeks ago.
And then you're going to Broadway.
Well, I cannot confirm that at this point, but yes, it looks like we will. There is a huge backlog because of COVID. There are only 1 or 2 theatres that are small enough to cope with it. We want to go to Broadway. We don't want to be off Broadway. Although there's nothing wrong with being off Broadway, but there is a huge kudos to being on Broadway. And for me, it will be a dream, because Uncle Richard, you know, he won 2 Tonys on Broadway. So for me, that's going to be the realization of a dream. Also, my father was from New York, so putting on a show on Broadway would be.
I think you'll get it there. I don't doubt it for 1 second, and you'll have to come back and tell us all about it.
It's a wonderful dream, and you know, to be nominated for the Olivier was fantastic. That had happened to me before, again with another story between one of my best friends that I'd worked with in 1997, and he looked like a young Eric Morecambe. And the moment I told him that, he did this thing with his glasses, and he looked even more like Eric Morecambe. I said, we are going to do a show about Eric Morecambe in 10 years' time. It took 13 years time. It took 13 years, and we produced Morecambe, which was a one-man show about Eric Morecambe, and it did the same thing. It went to the Edinburgh Festival, sold all the seats, then went into partnership with a West End producer, put it on at the Duchess. It was nominated for 3 Oliviers, and we won 1. And yeah, so it's a beautiful thing when an idea comes to fruition like that and is recognized at the high end.
So would you recommend to actors who are struggling to get roles to do more or less what you did? Well, just start your own production company and put on your own productions.
Well, that's what the Edinburgh Festival is for. Although Edinburgh is not an easy place to go, and it's terrifying. It does cost a lot of money, but it does open the doors. And I would say yes, if you've got the gumption to want to be an actor in today's environment, which is really tough, towards always us for actors, then don't be afraid to take the bull by the horns and to do something for yourself. Write something or find a great story that you can adapt, find a way to showcase your talents, because nobody is going to do that for you. The producers that are out there, it's so tough at the moment that no producer is going to want to take risks. So they're looking for star names that put, as we say, bums on seats. The moment you've got a star name in there, half your problem is solved. Because look, if I put Christian Slater in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's going to sell 50% of all the tickets just by hiring him. So if Christian Slater wants to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, well, let's find out. So when I asked him that question, do you want to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? He said, yeah, man. So Christian Slater's on board. So it's sometimes that easy. So if I was to go up to Scarlett Johansson and offer her to play Marilyn Monroe in my play, The Marilyn Conspiracy, which I am going to do, I would hope that she would say, yeah, I'd love to play Marilyn. On the other hand, she might say, sorry, I'm busy for the next 10 years doing movies. Or
she might say, how much?
I don't think stars work in that way. They would go,
really?
Agents would say how
I'm thinking, because that's the thing. So when you're saying about these people, you love to get these people, but these people usually come at a very high price tag. And it's not I say the actors would do it in a heartbeat, but their agents who manage their finances, it's not as easy to say, oh yes, we'll get so-and-so because we haven't got the budget to pay for so-and-so if you're just starting out. The lure of the
West End stage is a big thing for Hollywood stars. I mean, Christian came over. When you think that these stars get paid, you know, 25,000, 30,000 pounds a day to be in the movies, why would in hell they come and spend 12 weeks doing a play where they're getting paid 8,000 pounds a week? You know, and that's a lot for an actor, getting paid 8,000 pounds a week. So but they do it because they want the challenge. They want to perform on the West End stage. It's just like we want to go to Broadway. The cost for doing a Broadway play are 4 times that of doing a play in the West End. So, you know, if I was to go up to, I remember when they asked me to do my dream list for casting One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Originally, I had Bill Bailey, and Bill, he suddenly, he got busy. There was another project. There was a bit of a clash. I had to write a dream list. So top of my dream list was Sean Penn and Robert Downey Jr. First equal. Then there was Woody Harrelson, and then was Christian Bale, and then was Christian Slater. And we sent letters to all of them. And I got a wonderful email back from Sean Penn saying, "Thank you so much for asking. I would so much love to play McMurphy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but I'm busy for the next 2 years." And got a lovely email from Robert Downey Jr.'s agent saying, "Thrilled to be asked, unfortunately, too busy." Woody Harrelson wanted to do it, but could only give us 8 weeks. We couldn't get 12 out of him. But Christian Slater, not only did his mother say, because his mother's his agent, say, "Don't talk to anybody else. Christian wants this job. You've got Christian. If you want him, you've got him. Money's no object." So we booked Christian, and Christian was fantastic.
What would your top tips be for any aspiring, up and coming theatrical producer?
Well, as a producer, they're a very different breed, and I'm not a typical producer in the sense that producing is about making something happen from scratch and employing people, and therefore you are using quite a lot of money to do that and raising the money. So it's about convincing. You've got to convince people to give you the money. And most of those people, if you're doing it in a commercial level, want a return for their money. So you've got 1 foot in the creative camp and 1 foot in the commercial camp. You need to know how to talk to both sides. So as a young producer, I would say, be sure of the material you want to do. Do not do something because you think it's going to make you famous. You do it because it ticks every single box, and make sure that you're very certain about your list of boxes. Exhaust the list of boxes that you've got to tick. Otherwise, you could end up missing something that's going to cost you an absolute fortune, and you'll go broke very, very quickly. On the fringe level, this is about realization of dreams. On the fringe level, as a fringe producer, you're doing things to be noticed. How can you produce work on a small scale to make it effective on a low budget and not waste your parents' money? I would say be very careful. Be sure of the material. Be sure of the talent you've got involved as a producer. If you are also the performer, be sure that you've got what it takes to deliver the goods. You've got to be realistic about your talent. There's no point in producing yourself and going through all that work if you're not right for the part. You've got to look very critically at what you do. Part of it is instinct, and to know what will work. And Cameron Mackintosh said something which really struck a chord with me. He said, "I don't do anything that I don't like, and I don't let anything happen on stage that doesn't work for me. Therefore, it doesn't matter who my director is, whether it be Harold Prince, whether it be Trevor Nunn. If it's not working for me, I will have them fix it. I'm the one paying the bills. If it doesn't wash with me, it won't wash." And that's a really good thing for a producer. Ultimately, you have to accept responsibility. And part of that is what is going to work for you. What are the audience going to receive? You are the prism through which the audience receive that story. Yeah, will it work for an audience? And I mean, one of the things I measure is if I cry, it's working. And I tell the boys in Shark is Broken, these are grown middle-aged men, and I say, "I cried 3 times tonight." And they go, "Oh, thank you."
Yes.
Because if it's working, if it's moving me, it's moving an audience.
Yeah.
And that's all I can say. And when I'm performing, I know when I'm becoming emotional in the characters. And playing solo shows, you tend to play loads of characters. And in Under Milk Wood, it's 69 characters. But I know when I'm becoming emotional, I'm connecting with the material, that I know that that's when the audience are really with me.
Yeah.
And that's all you can go by. So I would say you've got to have the courage of your convictions. You've got to love totally what you do, believe entirely in the story that you're telling, make sure you're telling it for the right reasons. And ambition is part of the process. It's not the goal.
So now we've reached the part of the interview that Melanie loves the most.
These cards, as everybody knows who's been with us for a while, they're very soft and silky, and they're lovely to touch. They're a real stress buster. If you need stress busting, get some of these cards. But they create great conversations, but they're really nice to shuffle. And so, you know, poor old Julie's, I do have a bit of a moment. I have a bit of a moment with my cards, but anyway, okay, I'm calm now. I've had my shuffle. I've got my fix for today. I'm happy now. I'm in the zone. I'm in the zone. Right, let's see if I can spread these out without dropping them everywhere. So, Guy, I'm just going to run my finger along the cards, and then you just yell stop, and then we'll pick a card.
Stop. No, go back.
Go back. Go back.
That's the one. That's the one. No, next one.
Right. Okay. Again, this is a fairly good one. This is a fairly good one, considering the business.
I knew that card was good. I knew it.
You don't sound very enthusiastic, Melanie.
No, it's a good one, considering what we've been talking about and the industry that we're talking about. You picked faith.
Faith.
Okay. So, as we're creatives, I am going to ask you this in a very creative way. So, it stumps some people and Julie hates it because it's such a weird question. But actually, I think it's a very good question because it gets you thinking about things outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you, what does faith mean to you? What does it look, feel, and sound like?
Self-belief. Faith to me is all about self-belief. I'm not a believer in God or religion. I am a believer in a higher power, whatever that might be. I also think the higher power is linked to the self and what you make of it, what you make it. Faith to me is about understanding yourself and believing that you can find the power within you to persevere towards your goals and your dreams and desires.
I think that's very good, and I can agree with all of that. What was it, if it had a sound, what would it sound like to you?
I think, well, I just thought in that moment, like a strong blow of wind, like a breath of comfort, like a.
Oh, see, that's lovely. I like that, and it's lovely. And I agree, and I love asking these questions because you get some so different answers, don't we, Julie? It's
pretty good ones too, and then some that can move you to tears. That was actually quite profound.
It was. I got the shivers when he did that. Do it again.
It's like a wind behind you, like a.
Well, let's move it along a bit. What does it taste like?
What does it taste like?
There you go.
I think very creamy chocolate.
Oh, lovely.
Very beautiful Belgian milk chocolate, which you hold in your mouth and it's silky and delicious.
All the good stuff. All the good stuff.
No,
I love
that. It's gotta be.
Wow, on that sweet note, I think we'll wrap up now. As Melanie said, Guy, we could talk to you all day. It's been such a pleasure talking to you and listening to all your wonderful stories. Thank you so much for coming on the couch.
My pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll see you again. But for this week, that's it from On the Couch. See you next time. Bye-bye.